So this week is Parshas Yisro. Parshas Yisro, we have the Aseres Adibros. And all the Rishonim quote Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon teaching us that Aseres Adibros are a kitzur, an abbreviation of Taryag mitzvahs. And Aseres Adibros are the fundamentals. And each and every mitzvah of the entire list is in a way connected, associated with one of the Aseres Adibros. So actually, I could have chosen any sugi in the world to talk about today, any of the Taryag mitzvahs. But we will discuss a very painful and troubling question in halacha, which is associated with the special times we still are living in, with a war that is raging in Eretz Yisrael. So it always happens during wars, but especially in this war, that many soldiers were hurt and killed by what is called friendly fire, killed by their friends, and that is the nature of urban warfare. When war goes on in alleys and in buildings, and from one room to the other, it happens. And even some hostages were killed by Israeli soldiers. So a soldier that killed one of his comrades, one of his Jewish friends, does he need tikkunei tshuva? So let me just explain what are tikkunei tshuva. I don't know which of my sforim you have in yeshiva, but there's a minchas osha on corona, on the COVID pandemic. So the sefer came out a few years ago after a year of corona, and at the time it was a bestseller. Everybody bought the sefer. Today, nobody touches it. I think people are afraid to get infected. So I need to tell people the sefer contains no virus, and you don't need to be afraid of learning in the sefer. You're not going to get COVID from the sefer. So in Siman Kuf Mem Gimel, there's a long discussion because a similar dilemma came up in those days. You know, I remember a case in which a person knew that he has COVID, and he worked in a nursing home, and he went to his job. And a few days later, patients in the nursing home started dying, and 10 elderly people died, and it was quite obvious that he brought the virus into that nursing home, which was totally reckless, knowing that the residents in that home are compromised and frail and ill. And the question is, what does he need to take upon himself? So the concept of tikkunei tshuva is not found in Bavli or Yerushalmi, and the Sephardi tradition knew nothing about this. It comes from the early Hasidei Ashkenaz, primarily Sefer HaRoikeach and Sefer Hasidim. So the Beis Yosef never brings this concept in the entire Dalet Chelke Shulchan Aruch, but the Ramah does, following the tradition of Gedolei Ashkenaz. And 3 times in Shulchan Aruch, Shin Lamed Dalet Hilchas Shabbos, Kuf Pei Hei Hilchas Neder, and once again in Hilchas Yayin Nesach, the Ramah writes, if a person is Nichshel in Chilas Shabbos, he needs to fast 40 days. Nichshel in Nida, 40 days. Yayin Nesach, 4 days. And he needs to give tzedakah. How much tzedakah? How much it would cost to buy an animal if the Beis HaMikdash would be built, and you need to bring a korban chatos. So go to a farm and ask how much would it cost, and that is the sum you need to give for tzedakah. So that is the concept of tikkunei tshuva, lechaper avoin. And let me make another brief introduction. Shin Samachei Lavin, there are 365 lotas Shabbat, and none of them is a shoygeg liable. None of them is a shoygig punished besides hoireg nefesh b'shgogo. The only avera in which even a shoygig is punished is killing another person. And Sefer HaChinuch in Mitzvah Tov Yud explains that just proves what a harsh avera it is, taking the life of another Jew. And that is why it is the only lav out of Shin Samachei Lavin in which a shoygig bears responsibility. Any shoygig be'es hakoretz needs to bring a korban, but a korban is not punishment. It is only by hoireg nefesh that a shoygig gets golus. The Mashor Malkus Daf Yud maintains that golus is not a punishment. Golus is just to safeguard the Retzeach. He shouldn't be killed by the Goyal Adam. It's to his benefit. But in Minchas Osha Masechet Makos, I proved that no. Golus is a oynish and a kapora. Like any other oynish, like Malkus, like Dalad Mises Beis Din, the same golus. So it proves what a terrible avera it is to take the life of another person. And the Rambam writes, Perek Aleph Halacha Daled Milchus Rotzeach, that there is no other avera shehekpido olav Torah kemo shvichas domim. So the question we are discussing today is, when a Jew kills another totally with no intention and no negligence, it just happens in war, does he need tikkunei tshuva? Very first source is Tshuvas Mahari Weil. Does anybody know who Mari Weil was? Eidish or Nachman? I'll ask you a question which you could guess without any previous knowledge. Was he Sephardi or Ashkenazi? He deals with tikkunei tshuva for a person that caused the death of another. So you could guess he's Ashkenazi. All the sources we have in our sheet are Ashkenazi, as I explained before. So Mari Weil was one of the Rishonim B'nai Ashkenaz, one of the later Rishonim, going back almost 700 years. Let's have a look what the story is. We don't know much about this story. Achayim v'sholem lahuvi Rabbi Yekusiel, ech shebishlichoschu nerag Reb Ezra, Hashem yinkom domoi. So Yekusiel had a business. One of his workers was Ezra. And Yekusiel sent Ezra to buy, sell, do something for the business. And Ezra was killed. He was killed by Goyim that murdered him. And Yekusiel wants to know, do I bear responsibility? I did no wrong. Every day, he left the office, he went on errands, he took care of my business, but this time, he was killed. Do I bear responsibility? Mari Weil says, you do. And you need to take tikkunei tshuva. Let's have a look, one line before the end. V'toiv shetekabel olechu yesurim, kegon taniyos mem yoim. 40 days of fasting is a magic formula. I quoted a few minutes ago the Ramo. Shin Lamed Dalet Chilul Shabbos, Kuf Pei Hey Nida, 40 days. Mari Weil says the same. 40 days fast, even though it wasn't me, but he was going for you. He was your shaliach. And therefore you need to take something about yourself. If this person died, he was killed tragically, and his family needs financial support. He left over Yesoimim, then you help his family financially, and that's your kapara. Mari Weil proves his point from Sanhedrin Tzaddik. Sanhedrin Tzaddik, Kodesh Baruch Hu turns to David HaMelech and he says, you bear responsibility for 80 Koyanim in Noiv that were murdered by Doeg, and then Doeg and Achitophel were punished and they were killed. And you bear responsibility. So the story is told at great length. in Navi that David had some dealings with Kohenei Noiv, and Shaul accused and thought that he's cooperating with them in a conspiracy against him, and that is why the Kohen of Noiv were killed, and then Doeg was killed, and then Shaul, when he fought the Pelishtim, and David did not want to participate, then 3 children of Shaul were killed, and Shaul committed suicide. So Kodesh Baruch Hu tells David HaMelech, you bear responsibility for all this bloodshed, and therefore choose. Tipoy liyad oyev, either you would fall into your enemy's hands, or tichla zaracho, or your offspring will die out. And David HaMelech says, I prefer lipoy liyad oyev. I don't want to hurt my children. So let me share with you. Do you have a Sefer Tehillim with Rashi here at hand? So, Perek Ayin Beis in Tehillim is an interesting Perek, and the last posuk in Perek Ayin Beis is Kolu Tfilos David ben Yishai. Lefi Pshutam Shel Dvorim, it was the last Perek Tehillim that David said during his lifetime. So, Shkoyach. Ein Mukdam v'Meuchar. But Perek Ayin Beis is Kolu Tfilos David ben Yishai. And the very first posuk in this Perek is Elokim. Mishpotecha lemelech tein, v'tzidkascha leben melech. So the reason I asked for a Sefer Tehillim, because I don't remember, is it Rashi or Ibn Ezra? So it's Rashi. One pshat in the Rashi is, Mishpotecha lemelech tein, Yesurim yehu kolam bi, v'tzedakah aseh lebni, sheyesh shalom biyomav. David HaMelech says, if you're angry at me, and I deserve Yesurim, please give him to me, not to my son. Tzidkascha, give to my son. So a Jewish father is always willing to suffer just to salvage his children. So David HaMelech says, Neufel biyad oyev. So Mari Weil says, David HaMelech didn't kill. He had no bad intention, but in a way, he bears responsibility, and therefore he got an oynish. So the same goes to the person that sent another Jew, and he was killed on that journey. Noida Yehuda disagrees with Mari Weil. So today in the Shiur we have stories. I wish there was Sipurei Tzadikim. There's somewhat Sipurei Rishoim, more than Sipurei Tzadikim, but it's an interesting halachic sugya. So Noida Yehuda deals with a case in which there was a person that had a business, a retail business, and he sold merchandise. And business people came to buy merchandise and to do their own business. And he had a customer that used to buy merchandise from him many years. And he grew to be an old person. And once he comes together with his wife, and his wife pleads with the seller, don't give my husband stuff because he's old and it's dangerous. And it's a sakana for him to travel from one city to the other. So stop selling him merchandise. You're putting his life in danger. But sometimes greed overcomes the pleas and the tears of an old lady. And he says, I sell. I don't bear any responsibility what people do with the stuff they buy from me. And he did sell him stuff. And the person traveled around to sell his merchandise, and he died. So the person that sold him that merchandise asked the Noida Yehuda, do I need a kapora? So the Noida Yehuda says, you bear no responsibility. You sell stuff. You don't care what people do with the merchandise that you sell them. That's not your business. If this would come to me, I definitely think you bear responsibility. This is greed, you know. If this person's wife pleads with you, my husband is putting his life in danger. He should retire. He should stop doing this. Then you do bear responsibility. But anyway, the Anointed Yehuda says no. It's not your responsibility. But at the end of the day, he writes, V'yesanu shloisha yomim bahab. So he's down from 40 to 3 days. Ve'im retzoynoi liten eze metona liyesoymei hanerag dovor toiv. So the Noida B'Yehuda is somewhat more lenient than Mari Weil, even though I think that the Noida B'Yehuda's case is far worse than the Mari Weil's case. In the Mari Weil's story, I did nothing wrong. 1,000 people traveled the Weiss, and he did this every day. It wasn't a dangerous place, but he was killed by Goyim. What could I do? And Mari Weil says, fast 40 days and support the family. In the case of the Noida B'Yehuda, why didn't you listen to that person's wife? She told you he was putting his life in danger. And the Noida B'Yehuda says 3 days, and if you wish to give a metona could be $18, could be $10,000, I don't know. If you wish to give a metona, that would be nice. Tshuvas Ramah. And the Ramah deals with a person killing another with a gun. You would be surprised to know that 500 years ago, people used guns, and they did. It was nothing like the automatic rifles we use today. It was a musket, which had a long barrel, and the person using a gun had 2 pouches. One pouch was dynamite. And you need to put up the gun and spill some dynamite, which was called avak sreifa in our Sforim. And then in the other pouch, you had little metal beads, and you poured some of those in, something like making a coffee today. And then you got one shot. And between one shot and the other, you need to stand up your gun, spill in some dynamite, spill in some bullets, and then you got another shot. And the Ramah tells the story. 2 Jews were in a wagon. The young boy was taking care of the horses. He held the reins. And the older person was sitting behind him. And by mistake, he shot him in the head and he killed him. Does he need a kapora? And the Ramah brings Mari Weil. Everybody quotes Mari Weil. He was the first one dealing with this question. And the Ramah says, I don't want to be machmir, but let's look at the last paragraph. But there is no date, so we don't know when this tshuva was written. He says, from today till after Yom Kippur, you need to fast every day. Was it Pesach? Was it Simchas Torah? We don't know when this happened. So how would we know how many days he needed to fast? But every day till after Yom Kippur, v'lezvadois b'kol yom erev avoika, v'yachachach yikva oisoi hayoim she'iru bo yamais hayoim b'chiyah, loy ledoirois les'anois oisoi hayoim. The day this tragedy happened, every coming year, you need to fast. And he writes, Ein lahach meyoysem ezeh kedei lahokel al balei tshuva. Source number 4 is another tshuva in the same Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was a Menachem. Who knows who was the Tzemach Tzedek? What? The Lubavitcher Rebbe? But it's not this one. There were 2 Tzemach Tzedeks. Both carried the name Menachem Mendel. This was the Menachem Mendel Krochmiel, who lived almost 400 years ago. And both tshuvas we have on our sheet are from that earlier Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek is somewhat similar to Marivail, but more detailed. A person sent a messenger on a shlichus, and he need to cross over a river on a very narrow bridge that had no makkah. Many people walked that bridge, but the person slipped, fell into the river, and drowned, and was killed. And the question was, his boss, does he need tikkunei tshuva? And this is a very interesting tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek, which I quote from time to time, and the Tzemach Tzedek says, person has a right to put himself in sakana to provide for his family. And therefore, his shaliach had a right to try to pass over that bridge. And therefore, the mishaleach, the balabayas, also bears no responsibility. So the Tzemach Tzedek quotes Marivail, disagrees, and it is not clear what was his psak at the end of the day. So the psakim regarding a person that brought about the death of an other without intention vary extremely. This Tzemach Tzedek seems to say no kapora at all. The Noida Yehuda says fast 3 days, and if you want, give the family tzedakah. Marivail says 40 days. Shalosh Tshuvas Reb Chaim Kohen. Who was Reb Chaim Kohen? More than 300 years ago, one of the Gedolei Hador living in Lvov, which is also known as Lemberg, was Reb Chaim Kohen Rappaport. His Tshuvas is a new test. He also deals with a gun accident. A husband killed his wife, naturally, without intention. And he says he needs to fast Tov Lamed Taniyos, 430 tzaimis. So first of all, he gave him a brocha l'arichas yomim v'shonim. If he needs to fast 430 days. 3, 40, 430. There's a tshuva Maram Lublin, who was very machmir. So obviously we didn't have enough space on the sheet. Tshuvas Marshal is the most important regarding the question I needed to deal with, because some of the soldiers that tragically killed their friends turned to me, broken, adichducha shel nefesh. We killed our friends, Jewish people. Tshuvas Marshal. Interesting story. There was a young Jewish boy, obviously had some problems, ADHD or similar problems, hyperactive, and he went on everyone's nerves on the boat. They were on a boat. So when they got to land, the goyim wanted to beat him up, and they were chasing him. And a Jew named Reb Moshe Lipschitz. I know nothing about him. How would I know? He lived 500 years ago. And he was afraid that the goyim might kill this boy. Anti-Semites. So he told the goyim, I'll take care of him. Leave it up to me. I'll punish him. So they stood put, and he was chasing the boy. The boy ran faster than him. So he asked somebody, a goy, will you catch that boy and bring him to me? He was chasing the boy, and the boy was running away, and he fell to his death. So the Moshe Lipschitz asks, do I need a kapara? The boy was running away from me. He was running away from a man that I asked to catch him. But all I wanted is just to save him. If the goyim would run after him, he might be killed. And my intention was totally pure. I wanted to save the boy. But I caused his demise. And the Mashal quotes Marivail. And he says, because Moshe Lipschitz wanted to save the boy, no kapora at all. And I'm afraid if we would give him a bad conscience, a guilty conscience, atu machshilon la'ased lavoi, people will say, why should I get involved? Why should I get involved? I might hurt a boy. and then I will be punished, and therefore, because he was out to save the boy, no kapara whatsoever. Tshuvas Chasam Soifer Orachayim Kufayin Zayin. Interesting story, crazy story. So a cleaning lady who was Jewish fainted in someone's home. And the Balas Abayis ran to bring schnapps. You know what schnapps is? Whiskey, cognac, vodka. In our sources, called yash. You know what yash is? Yayin saraf, burning wine. Not exactly, but... So in those days, they believed if a person faints, you need to pour whiskey into his mouth. Sometimes it worked. When it worked, probably it would work even better if you didn't pour whiskey into his mouth. But that is what they believed. A glazer bronfen cures every ailment. That's what they thought at the time. So she ran to bring yash, to pour into this young girl's mouth, and by mistake, she took petrol. Economica, or what's economica in English? Bleach, and she poured it into the nebertige girl's mouth, and she died because she burned her throat. She couldn't breathe. So this woman is tormented. And in this case, she killed that young girl. But she thought she's giving her a bronfen. And she poured bleach into her mouth. And the Chassam Sofer, like the Mashal says, she was trying to save that girl. Tragic accident. Atonement. And therefore, no tikkun kapora. And then he does write, she should daven le'ilu nishmasa, something very mild. So on one hand, we brought a few sources. If you caused another person to die, even though you did nothing wrong, you need a kapara. But if you try to save a person, you don't need any kapara. L'chayre, this goes against the Sif Meforish in Shulchan Aruch. Yoredei Shin Lamed Vav Sif Aleph is Hilchas Biker Choylem. Also Hilchas Refuah. And the Shulchan Aruch says, if a doctor made a mistake and he caused the person to die, Chayev Golus, a doctor is there to save lives. And that is what he was trying to do. Nevertheless, Chayev Golus. And we're not choishish ato machshilan liyosed lovoi. I think the chashash ato machshilan liyosed lovoi in the case of the Chassam Sofer and the Mashal is extremely unreasonable and remote. This is a coincidence. It doesn't happen every day that a girl faints and we try to give her bronfen. It doesn't happen every day that a Jew sees Goyim chasing a Jewish boy and he steps in and he says, I'll catch him. And after became their choishish, we don't want a person to be afraid to get involved. Kal v'chomer, a doctor. So the Aruch HaShulchan asks, Makas daf hey, Ava makas benoy, Rava makas talmido, Shliach beisen, Shehorgu, Einam goylem, because according to the mitzvah, there is no golus. So why would a doctor be chayav golus? Isn't a doctor an oiseg b'mitzvah? The source of this din in Yoredei Shin Lamed Vav is a Tosefta. Don't look for it in Tosefta because you won't find it. In most Toseftas, there's a different gerasa. But the Tur took it from Ramban, Torah Se'odem. That's the gerasa of the Ramban and Tosefta. Roife Shehorek Chayav Golus. And the Biragro on the spot Shin Lamed Vav Sif Aleph quotes the Tosefta. So the Aruch HaShulchan says, Shin Lamed Vav Sif Beis, that the Shulchan Aruch deals with a case in which there is negligence. In modern language, we have the definition gross negligence. And then a doctor bears responsibility. But if a doctor used his best judgment, and he did what doctors should be doing, and you never know how a patient might respond, then he bears no responsibility. So based on all these sources, my psak was that those soldiers in the tension of a battlefield, when you must decide in a split second, in a fraction of a second, how to respond, and it is your duty to care for yourself and for your friends, then no kapora should be necessitated, like we find in Shuvas Marshal and Shuvas Chasam Sofer. V'hu rachum yechaper oven. But I did say, do something positive. You don't need to fast 430 days, not even 40 days, but learn Torah, daven, give tzedakah, leilui nishmosam, and that would be the tikkun. So this week's parsha is Parshas Yisroi Kabbalas HaTorah. No parsha is more relevant to yeshiva boys, to Bnei Torah, than Parshas Yisroi. Or the Chaim HaKodesh in this week's parsha, Vayisu mirafidim, Vayachanu bamidbar, Vayichen sham Yisur neged ahar. Kosav Or Chaim, that this posek is a remes to the three most fundamental yesoides of Kinyan Torah. Chazal HaMefarish Rafidim, Gemara and Sanhedrin, Rafu Yedayim Medivrei Torah. Chazal give this pshat not in our week's parsha, but in last week's parsha. Not the posuk v'yisum Rafidim, but the posuk about Amalek. V'yalochem im Yisrael b'Rafidim. The Gemara says, what does Rafidim mean? How does Amalek have koyach to fight Yisrael? Rafu Yedayim Medivrei Torah. So the Chaim says, step number one is Omar HaTorah, Omar an Yegia. Ein HaTorah niknes ela ba'omar. V'yisum Rafidim, according to the Chaim, is you need to go away from Rifyon Yodayim. You need to invest Yegias HaTorah. Otherwise, you will never achieve greatness in Torah. What does Omar HaTorah mean? It means Omar HaGuf and Omar HaSeichel. It means learning 1 hour and 2 hours and 3 hours and learning Basmoda, learning Bishkido. And it also means trying to understand Umko Shel Halacha, trying to clearly clarify and understand and appreciate everything you are learning. You all remember the Gemara? V'shinantam levanecho, shi'eh divrei Torah mechudodom beficho. Who remembers where this mamar appears? What? What? Great. Kiddushin daf lamed amud aleph. Mamash at the bottom of lamed amud aleph. So what is pshat? Shi'eh divrei Torah mechudodom beficho. Do you remember what Rashi says? Chazoir aleim uvedoik la'oim kan. Chazoir aleim uvedoik la'oim kan. And that is exactly what most yeshivas do. We have a Seder Iyun, V'doik la'oim kan. We're encouraged to do Bekiyas, and that is Chazoir aleim. And that is step number one, V'yisu merafidim, Amal HaTorah. Number two, V'yachanu bamidbar, and that's a remes for Anova. Twice in Shas, Erev Nun Daled, Nadorim Nun Hey, the Gemara is Mefarish HaPosek Memidbar Matona. Kol HaMeisem Atzmoi Kemidbar, HaTorah Nitenet Lo B'Matona. Rashi and Daran have two pshotim. One is Meisem Atzmoi Kemidbar. The Midbar is Hefker Lekol. Nobody possesses the desert. So, who is the one? Meisem Atzmoi Kemidbar, Misha Mafker Atzmoi Lelamed Torah Lekoil. Marbitza Torah that are willing to teach anybody that wants to learn, Torah Netenes Lo B'Matona. The other pshat is, Vayisu B'Midbar is a remes for Anova. Why? Because of all the different types of topography on our planet, so we have the jungles, the rainforests, the Great Plains, and then we have the desert. And the desert is the only type of terrain that doesn't support life. No fruit, no vegetation, no water, parched sand, and the burning sun, and that is why the desert is a remez la'nova, and a nova is essential to Kinyan Torah. Tanas Dav Zayin, the Gemara says, Torah nimshel el hamayim. Mayim menichim mokum gavoya v'yodem lemokum namach. Water will always go to the lowest point. Ein divrei Torah meskaimen, elo b'mishadato yishafeilo. Yerushalmi Yavom Samech Tesam Ed Aleph, and a Medrash Rabbe Parshas Beshalach, there is an interesting story. Rabbeinu Ovar al Simonaya. Rabbeinu HaKodesh passes a town called Simonaya. Amru lo b'nei Simonaya. So the Kehillah turned to Rebbe, and they asked, Yesh lecha odom echod she'eh koiroi v'masnei imonu v'danas dineinu v'doirish v'ovid kol tzirchono. We're not a rich community. We can't pay for a dayan and a Rosh Hashiva and a Rav and a Magid. Do you have one person that could fulfill all these functions? An amazing person, Ish Eshkoilis. We need him to be the Rav of the community, a Poisik, a Dayan, a Rosh Hashiva. We also need him to tell stories by Malava Malka, Chassidish Amaisis, and give Shalashudas Torah, and once in a while a drosha. Do you have somebody like that? Nosen Lehemes Levi Bar Sisi, one of the great Amerom. He is Rav's Chaver and Bar Plukta. Rav and Levi usually come together in Shas. And then they made a big ceremony, Lechavoidoi, in honor of the new Rav. So in our times, when you make a cemetery in the honor of a new Rav, people come together and everybody says how great the new Rav is, what a wonderful Rav he is. So obviously, in days of yore, once upon a time, everybody came together and they asked Shilas, if we have a new Rav, then let him do his job. So the community comes together. The first question they ask Levi, the new Rav, Gidem es mai shetach loitz. Lo have a biyoda. He says, I don't know. Second question, Yavom Esharaka Kadam, mai. Lo have a biyoda. I don't know. Amru b'nei Simonaya, dil meleis dein barulpan. Obviously, he's not allowed. We were fooled, we were cheated. But maybe he's a Magid. So they started asking questions, and I got it. Posik and Daniel. Es a Rosh B'Ksav Emes. Lo have biyodei. 2 weeks ago, I spoke to a kenes of Rabbonim in Moira Heiroa. And I said, the two most important words for a Rav, the two most important words for a Rav are Eini Yordeya. And if you can't say those two words, you can't be a Rav. You're not allowed to be a Rav. Unless you could say Eini Yordeya. Nobody knows everything. And if you think you're expected to know everything, then you cannot be a Rav. Be a Maggid Shia, be a Rosh Hashiva. A Rosh Hashiva could know everything. A Rav can't know everything. However, Levi, whatever he was asked, he said, Eini Yordeya. You can't exaggerate. You know nothing. So, obviously, they were nice people, B'nai Simonaya. They didn't want to embarrass a person that might be a Talmud Chochem. So the ceremony was over earlier than planned. The next day, Rabbeinu HaKodesh, who lived in Tzipori, comes to Shul. Oh, we have a big guest, the Rav of Simonaya. And Rabbi asks Levi, what are you doing here? Just yesterday you got a shtela. What happened? And Levi says, Al taskireini tzerosi. Let's not talk about it. It's too painful, Levi says. Let's talk about different things. And Rabbi insists, what happened? You got a job yesterday. Why are you here? And he tells him the story. He says, I was terribly embarrassed. It didn't work out. They asked me questions. I knew nothing. So I left. And Rabbi is shocked. And Rabbi asks Levi, what did they ask you? And Rabbi asks him these same questions. And he reels out the answers. Gidem es choletzes b'sheneo. Yavam esharak kedam chalitzos aksheri. Efshel adam b'lo yitzich tzucharoik. It's a gemara in Yavam es kufei. What about the posuk in Daniel? It's a rosh miksav emes. Kan lifnei gzar din, kan lach gzar din. So Rabbi says, so you do know. So why didn't you tell them? Levi says, Bima gedola osuli. I was sitting on a stage. V'tofach ruchi ulai. I felt great. What a kavod. V'nishtakho memeni tarasi. And I forgot all my Torah. Kora Olev Rabbi is a posuk hazeh novalto behitnasei. So we see how another is essential. And any drop of gaiva could take away all your Torah. And whenever I tell the story, I ask, in my lifetime, I sat on many big stages, and I spoke to a lot of people, and I must confess, more than once, tofach ruchi ulai, when you're sitting on a stage and 10,000 people are listening to you, you feel great. And I didn't forget all my Torah. And usually when people ask me questions, sometimes I say Eini Yodea, but most of the times I know what to answer. So why doesn't it happen to us? And my answer is very simple. Moshe Lamado V'Doima. You got a gift, a bottle of wine that costs $1,500. And if some of you might be surprised, there are some bottles of wine that would cost $10,000. So you have a very expensive wine that costs $1,000 or $2,000, and you want to make Kiddush, and there's a centimeter missing to fill up the becher. So your little boy says, let's pour in some Coke. It's the same color. You say, are you crazy? You're out of your mind? This Gavia, this becher, is worth $150. I'm not going to ruin it with Coke. Let's look for a smaller becher. But if you buy in Rami Levi grape juice for 12.5 shekel, and you're missing a centimeter, you could pour in Coke, put in water, put in whatever you want. It's the same taste anyway. Won't make any difference. Their Torah was precious wine. Their Torah was a bottle of wine that cost $500,000. So it was sensitive. Any drop of anything else would totally destroy the taste. Our Torah is like a 12 shekel bottle of grape juice. Doesn't matter. It's not sensitive. So their Torah was pure, kodesh, tahor. So any chesaron and midas had a devastating effect on their Torah. Our Torah is not that sensitive. So Ar Chaim HaKadosh says, step number 2 is anova. And then v'yichen shem yisrael neged ahar, ki yishechot b'levechot, that is dibuk chaverim, pilpul al tamidim, Talmud Torah b'yeshiva. Ein doima, Talmud Torah b'yeshiva. So when we read Parshas Yisro, this is the time for Kabbalas HaTorah, and especially for B'nai Torah. So you need to understand, Ein Torah niknes ela ba'omor, like the Rambam writes at great length in Perek Gimel of Hilchos Talmud Torah. Pas b'melech toichel mayim b'mesura tishto, u'b'Torah ato omer. And many times they say, Pas b'melech is a relative concept. We live in an age of abundance. We live in the age of plenty. In our day and age, between the Pas and the Melech, you can have some butter, some peanut butter, some jam, some vegetables. It still would be considered Pas b'melech. Mayim b'mesura, you could have some Sprite, some Coke, some Pepsi, here and there a shluck of whiskey. Be careful not to take bleach. It still would be considered mayim b'mesura. But what is eternal and never changes is b'Torah ato omer. And without omer, without yagia, you will never achieve greatness in Torah. So everybody has to take upon himself when we read the parsha of Kabbalas HaTorah, Omer HaTorah, and Shashua Shel Torah, and Midas Toivois, Rosh Verishin, the most important mid of all the Midas Toivos is Midas Anova and Dibuk Chaverim. So Baruch Hashem, you're learning in a wonderful yeshiva with wonderful bochum and wonderful rabbeim, and take advantage. And we should be Zoche Bekorov in the schus of Talmud Torah to only hear B'Seiles Tovis, Yeshuas v'Nachamis, and Bias Moshiach Tzedkenu, V'mheru v'Yomeinu, Amen. Good Shabbos.